A horrifying tale of a woman's revenge. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge, cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years, but if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbit spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many try to sidestep. Let's delve into everything step by step. Who is Lorina Bobbit? Lorena Leonore Bobbit, born Gallo, was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucay, located in eastern Guayas, Ecuador, near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-oriented. In her teenage years, she lost her father, and her relationship with her mother, Elvia Gallo, was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her paternal cousin, Lina Bobbit. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Lina's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the U.S. as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Bobbit owned her own beauty salon located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. Meeting John Bobbit. About 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous, as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment so late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup, and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere inside. The venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her, and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbit, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments, so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards, the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. Who is John Bobbit? John Wayne Bobbit was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo, in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall, he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service, with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments. But he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. A whirlwind romance and a modest wedding. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbit was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict Yana, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena, and she accepted. She was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them. And so the fairy tale ends. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's sharp remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that John was to blame since she had called him to the table several times, but he was too engrossed in the TV. In response, he slapped her, and she retaliated in kind. Lorena had always believed that she could stand up for herself and would not let herself be mistreated. But the longer she lived with this man, the more he dominated her, suppressing her will, feelings, and determination to stand up to him. John established his own rules in their home, and he treated his wife as nothing more than an object, constantly criticizing her, physically abusing her, and coercing intimacy, even when she was unwilling. Failed motherhood. The young wife naively believed that if they had a child together, her husband would soften and stop his cruel behavior. However, as it turned out, John had no desire to have children. Therefore, when Lorena informed him of her pregnancy in 1992, he became incredibly angry. He demanded that she get an abortion immediately, and they never revisited the subject. Lorena procrastinated for several weeks, hoping her husband would change his mind, but he remained adamant and continued to pressure her to comply. Eventually, he literally forced her to go to the hospital and terminate the pregnancy, which was a tremendous shock to her and took a long time to recover from. In reality, John simply wanted to live for pleasure, unburdened by anything. He did not have a steady job, making ends meet by working as a bouncer in entertainment venues, and if he needed money, he would unashamedly take it from his wife, who worked as a manicurist and highly sought-after makeup artist in a beauty salon. The last straw. Lorena tried not to tell anyone about what was happening at home and not to complain, but her friends and colleagues began to notice changes in her behavior. From a joyful, smiling girl, she turned into a quiet, haunted shadow of her former self. Those around her suspected that all was not well in her family, but they had no idea how serious it was. Her husband's behavior became increasingly controlling. He closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lorena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone, as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 a.m, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down, but then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard, and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage, and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend, who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbit was. Precision surgery. Throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, slowing the blood loss significantly. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention. The question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it, reattaching it to its original place with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice, and urgently transported to the hospital where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon who arrived from the state capital was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before, but he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time, which lasted more than 9 hours and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. public outcry. That same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbit also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations, which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything, and if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses. 2 parallel court cases began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night, although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence, and humiliations she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her will under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income, yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus, John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty in the fall of that year. Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her spouse. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus, he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbit, Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively, but over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas, and by his 50s, he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life, during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbit had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought to trial for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did not take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elvia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lorena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News, The Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show. In the mid-2000s, Lorena remarried. Her new husband was a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bobbit at all, and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. A meeting 15 years later. In 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face-to-face for the first time on the show Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his words and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. Today, we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. This amazing country attracts tourists from all over the world with the opportunity to relax on snow-white beaches, as if descended from advertising brochures, to touch almost untouched by man-exotic nature, to taste the unique local cuisine, and of course, it is Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Azure Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car. 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They looked like longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear, and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair, touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up, but she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A terrible picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom on the floor in a pool of blood lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents' eyes. Today before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She will be 16-year-old Esmeralda Reaches. Esmeralda Reaches Martinez was born August 23, 2006 in the province of La Altagracia, in the family of restaurant owners Eligio Riscosti and Isabel Martinez Reaches. She grew up in a complete happy family, had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers and was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher, as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023, was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house. He introduced himself as a teacher and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding. The walk had to be cut short and she had to be brought back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Riches' death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following the violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. But who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk, supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police also sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, and some were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results of the forensic examination, which ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the phones of Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, but indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and a few hours later to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay. Because of the evidence collected against him, the prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Let me remind you that preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person, not as a punishment for a crime he or she has committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her, but no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stops were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily, and thinking it was a woman's cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to make her fall asleep. It was learned from one of the girl's cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her an audio message in the early morning hours asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." But unfortunately, the friend listened to the help recording too late. The next day, Esmeralda was found breathless on the floor of her bathroom, completely bloodied. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police and his home was searched a day later, during which the clothes he was wearing that night while out with his female students were seized. His cousin, who was the second man that night, Ruben Murillo, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There are many ambiguities in the investigation into the event. The prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation rather than making new speculations about an event that alarmed the public. The public demanded a quality investigation to find out the real cause of the young girl's death. Many felt that the obvious facts that were on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigation. This involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the very car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, which triggered the bleeding. The car was urgently requested by the authorities, but as it turned out, it was sold in a hurry by John Kelly's wife. The investigation believed that such a hasty sale of the car was a fact of hiding evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Paniagua Pillier. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Paniagua, who was the new owner of the car was finally inspected. But other than traces of blood that belonged to Esmeralda in the car, no other evidence was found. The court ruling determined that there was not enough evidence to keep J.C. Espinal Richo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months. The prosecutor launched his own investigation and re-interviewed the 3 girls who accompanied Esmeralda, testimony that helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Marilla Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Riches in La Otra Banda, Iguay, with 3 other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. It turned out that originally, the whole company was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way, John changed his mind and changed the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Macau beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer, and returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat, while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but it was noticed by one of the girlfriends. Arriving at the beach, the 3 girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and of course their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends as well. After a moment without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot where, according to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room, and when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal, and she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Riches' blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom at the gas station. They also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the facts. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that the girl had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypovolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effects. When taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen, this component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher John Kelly was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the El Banal Public Cemetery. Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her. They described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4th, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Riches' life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Murillo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Ana Muria Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Higüey. Rubiel Murillo Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney Raimundo Rosario said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for John eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said, "It is their turn to fight for justice." A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents are entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Agree. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that in this battle fear wins, taking precious life. Financial hardships can befall anyone. Some resolve their difficulties swiftly, while others may struggle for years. However, how one chooses to overcome these challenges is crucial. While some work diligently, earning money through honest labor, others resort to crime for quick gains. There's also a third group willing to partake in the creation of controversial yet in-demand adult content, naturally for a substantial reward. Engaging in this line of work isn't illegal, but actors, often actresses in this genre, face severe societal judgment and criticism. Nonetheless, the allure of rapid wealth and the pursuit of dubious fame can override moral principles. Moreover, many now operate remotely, setting up studios at home and conducting live broadcasts. Yet, one must not overlook the potential severe emotional harm to the actresses, leading to real tragedies. The case of Carol Maltese, a young mother and actress in adult films, is a stark example of what striving for fame and money in this industry can lead to. She didn't view her work as immoral. She was merely striving for financial independence, planning to retire once she had enough to support herself and her young son. However, she was never able to leave the industry, and tragically, her body, once admired by thousands of fans, was eventually found dismembered on a rocky cliff beside a road. Childhood and early years of Carol Maltese. Carol Nicole Maltese was born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province, the only child of her parents, Fabio and Josephine. She had Italian maternal roots and Dutch paternal heritage. When she was just 4 years old, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother. Subsequently, her father moved back to his homeland, the Netherlands, remarried, and had more children. Josephine chose to remain in Italy, raising her daughter alone as her former husband offered little support. They lived in a small community called Sesto Calenda in the province of Varese. The mother worked multiple jobs simultaneously to provide her daughter with everything necessary, a good education, and the opportunity for a better life. Carol grew up to be a beautiful, kind, and sociable girl with many friends and an easy rapport with others. As a schoolgirl, she actively participated in sports, particularly horseback riding, and regularly attended a dance studio. Maltese was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, read extensively, and could engage in conversation on almost any subject. As a teenager, she became a true beauty with a slim, feminine figure, already having many admirers and suitors, and she loved being the center of attention. After finishing school, she entered a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion, where she soon became one of the top students in her class. Unexpected pregnancy. During her freshman year, Carol developed a romantic relationship with a young man a year her senior who was studying at the Faculty of Architecture and Design. In the fall of 2020, when Carol was 20 years old, she discovered she was pregnant. This news was a complete surprise to both her and the child's father. They were both students and utterly unprepared for such a development. Nevertheless, Carol firmly decided to keep the baby. In 2016, the young couple had a son together, and their lives changed drastically. Both had to leave school because they lacked the funds to support themselves and their newborn. The new parents decided to move to Verona, where there were more opportunities to earn a living and provide for their family. Carol got a job as a sales consultant in a large cosmetics and perfume retail chain shortly after her son turned 1, while her boyfriend worked on various projects from home, also taking care of their son. New love. In the middle of 2019, Carol unexpectedly fell for another man named Angelo, with whom she began a passionate affair. The couple secretly met for about 6 months, renting hotel rooms, messaging each other at night, and striving to spend every free moment together. However, just before the new year, The father of Carol's child found out about her relationship and decided to part ways with his unfaithful partner. Maltese felt this was for the best since she was planning to leave for her new boyfriend anyway. But then a problem arose. Angelo lived in his parents' house, and Carol couldn't move there with her child from a previous relationship. Therefore, they decided to rent a place together. But at that time, the coronavirus pandemic swept the world, leaving the young couple jobless and unable to afford their own apartment. Carol eventually moved into the home of her new boyfriend's parents and decided to temporarily leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until the situation stabilized and she could bring him to live with her. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. A widespread self-isolation regime was declared. Everyone was confined to their homes, and Carol faced significant financial difficulties. During this challenging period, Angelo and his parents supported Carol as best they could. She effectively lived at their expense in their home, unable to contribute financially to her young son. Moreover, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which was progressing, and the woman needed costly therapy. Unexpected source of income. Amidst the lockdown, Maltese frantically considered how to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She decided to try earning through social networks and her own YouTube channel, sharing about life in isolation and the challenges she faced. However, this content didn't attract much interest, but her striking appearance as a novice blogger drew attention, earning her compliments and even some inappropriate proposals in the comments. A subscriber suggested she create an account on the platform OnlyFans, noting that her striking looks would be highly appreciated there, and she could become a star and earn quickly. Carol took this advice and registered on the service under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel. She began creating revealing content, posting her intimate photos and short videos. Quickly, she amassed a significant following willing to pay for such content. Carol soon began earning well, but kept from her boyfriend and close relatives how she was making money and what she was being paid for. Over time, her content became more explicit and sophisticated as she strove to please her fans, and she herself enjoyed this line of work. Carol hid the details of her job as long as she could, but about 6 months later, someone she knew stumbled upon her account. Rumors spread, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. She wasn't too upset, and even tried to justify it by claiming that her work was also a form of art that brought in a decent income and fully satisfied her. However, the conservative Italians were not ready to accept this, so friends and close ones gradually turned away from Carol, believing she was engaged in something immoral, and associating with her might tarnish their reputations. Carol herself regarded this attitude towards her work as prejudice, and was confident that she would achieve success, becoming wealthy and famous. Adult film stars soon, the beauty became so popular that adult film studios took serious interest. Several directors approached the sultry Italian with offers to star in their films, and she readily agreed. She participated in group shoots and public performances. Word of her activities quickly reached Angelo, who naively thought his girlfriend was working remotely as a designer, but sometimes went to the office. He was shocked and at a loss for what to do next, as he hadn't planned on breaking up with her. However, when his parents learned about the situation, they insisted he break up with this fallen woman immediately, lest she disgrace their entire family. By then, Carol had enough money to rent her own place. Her OnlyFans account was extremely popular. She regularly received offers from directors, and her fees kept increasing. In interviews, she claimed she didn't plan to do this all her life and intended to eventually finish her education and try her hand as a designer or modeler. But for now, she truly enjoyed what she was doing and was well compensated for it. Nonetheless, Carol often spoke about the constant moral pressure from those around her, their judgments and attempts to shame her, causing certain psychological traumas. She called her work art and advocated for every woman's right to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Attempt to move on and a new dominant lover. At 25, Maltese moved to a small town called Rescaldina in the Milan province, deciding to start over. She planned to leave her career in the adult industry behind and got a job as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. It seemed she had completely changed her life, but this was only temporary. A few months later, she met a 42-year-old local banker named Davide Fontana, who was passionate about photography, specializing in nude styles. They met online where he was seeking a model for his explicit projects. Carol responded to his offer, and during their first meeting, the pair felt an irresistible mutual attraction. Fontana had been officially married for many years, but this did not stop him from starting a relationship with the young beauty. They began dating, organizing explicit photo sessions that invariably ended in intimacy. Soon, he learned about Carol's past activities and convinced her to return to filmmaking, noting her real talent. David had mixed feelings for her. He loved her, wanted to possess her, but also liked seeing his young lover in adult films. In March 2021, the banker divorced his wife and started living with Carol, realizing their most explicit and sinful fantasies. He helped her create content that was incredibly popular on OnlyFans, but he took a cut of the profits from their joint work. Carol soon became so successful and popular that foreign directors and studios began offering her lucrative contracts for shoots. Fontana was quite jealous in life, reacting sharply when others paid attention to his girlfriend on the street or tried flirting with her, but there were no restrictions or limits when it came to filming. He treated it as a regular job, which the actress was completely comfortable with. A few months later, Angelo called her, confessing he missed her greatly. He proposed they get back together, noting he was ready to accept her line of work and wouldn't interfere or restrict her. Carol was touched, but admitted she already had another man. Nevertheless, they continued to communicate. But when Davide learned about this, he became enraged, threatened Angelo, and even set his car on fire. Angelo immediately reported to the police about the threats to his life and property damage. The authorities issued a restraining order preventing Fontana from approaching Angelo, but no evidence of the banker's involvement in the arson was found, so he did not compensate for the damage. Workplace romance. The in-demand actress often flew overseas for shoots, and her subscribers numbered over 30,000. Carol was saving up to buy her own home to take her son with her and planned to leave the adult film industry, find another job, and focus on raising her son. Meanwhile, she began making custom videos, which proved to be a lucrative business. Fans sent her their own scripts of what they wanted to see, and she brought their fantasies to life for a handsome fee. Fontana continued to help her with filming and editing. They still lived together and shared the profits. In September 2021, Maltese met an actor named Salvatore Galdo on a film set, who was her partner in several explicit films. However, real feelings ignited between them, and they started a romantic relationship. They dated secretly, fearing what Davide might do to her new lover. She waited for the right moment to tell the banker everything and break up with him for good. A few months later, Galdo gave her an engagement ring, asking her to become his lawful wife, and she joyfully accepted. By the end of the year, Carol had saved enough money to buy her own home. She planned to take her son, marry Salvatore, and finally decided to talk to Fontana. The man took the news surprisingly calmly. It seemed he understood everything and was ready to let her go to her new lover. But they still had several unfinished projects for which they had already been paid. They agreed to complete the work and then peacefully part ways forever. The mysterious disappearance of Carol. At the beginning of 2022, Maltese unexpectedly vanished. She stopped appearing in films, ceased online streams, didn't communicate with colleagues, and accepted no new offers from directors. Many knew she had planned to leave the industry, so they assumed she had done just that. However, even her friends and fiancé, who were very concerned, couldn't reach her. Carol didn't answer calls but responded to messages and messengers, claiming she was fine, had decided to radically change her life, and needed time for herself. To her fiancé Salvatore, she wrote that she had contracted COVID-19, was self-isolating, and they couldn't see each other for a while. Apparently, this explanation satisfied him, as he did not raise the alarm either a month or 3 months later. On social media, new posts occasionally appeared on her account, but she hardly interacted with anyone, limiting herself to terse and brief responses. According to the latest photos on Carol's page, she had gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone. Parts of an unidentified body in bags. On March 20th, 2022, a passerby was walking along the outskirts of the Italian community of Borno, on a road along a rocky cliff. He was suddenly drawn to large black trash bags lying on the slope near a body of water. The area was scenic and deserted, so the man was annoyed that someone had decided to dump trash there. He went down to the nearest bag and tried to lift it, but it was quite heavy. The real horror struck him when he saw human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. The man immediately reported his gruesome discovery to the police, and the responding officers found 4 bags containing a human body divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined it was a young woman who had died at least 2 months earlier, but they could not establish the cause of death. The body had been in a freezer before someone dumped it off the cliff. Presumably, the criminal drove here, simply throwing the bags down, hoping that in such a secluded place they would remain undiscovered for a long time. The bags tore on impact, causing some of the contents to spill out. Clearly, the criminal had done everything possible to keep the remains unidentified for as long as possible by removing all distinctive features. Pieces of skin were cut off in areas likely covered by tattoos. However, parts of these tattoos remained but were severely damaged. The skin in those areas had been burned with hot objects, cut, and doused with acid. Nevertheless, by piecing together bits of the tattoos and comparing them with a database of missing persons, the police concluded that no one was looking for a woman with such features. This was odd, leading to the speculation that the deceased was not local. This remained a belief until a news report about the body was broadcasted, asking anyone who might recognize the described features to come forward. Soon after, a woman who appeared in adult films came to the station and said that based on the description of the tattoos, she recognized her colleague, who had disappeared in early January. The actress mentioned that the deceased worked under the pseudonym Charlotte, but she did not know her real name. This information proved crucial, as law enforcement now knew what the girl looked like in life, and they quickly established her identity and real name. The peculiar fiancé. As soon as the deceased's name became known, it was revealed that she had gotten engaged to her colleague, Salvatore Galdo, shortly before her disappearance, who, curiously, had not reported his fiancée missing. This led to the first suspect being found and detained. However, the man was clearly upset by the news of his beloved's demise and puzzled as to why he himself was under suspicion. According to Salvatore, he had kept in touch with the woman through messengers and social media, providing their correspondence as proof. Thus, he had no idea that Carol had long been deceased. He claimed that his beloved had contracted COVID-19 earlier in the year and was self-isolating, which is why he hadn't visited her. When police asked why he hadn't called her to check if she needed help, he said he had spoken by phone with Fontana, who was nearby, and had promised to look after the woman. The fiancé's story was disjointed and unconvincing, but his testimony brought a second suspect into the case, who needed to be detained and interrogated. However, there was no need to search for David, as he himself turned up at the station the next day to report a person missing. The horrifying truth. Fontana, obviously, did not expect the body to be found so quickly, so he hadn't been following the news. When he learned that Carol had been found and identified, he became alarmed but still believed the detectives would not track him down. However, when the police arrested Salvatore, the man realized this person would lead law enforcement right to him, as they had communicated by phone, and he had concocted a story about COVID-19, promising to take care of his fiancée. David was visibly nervous, consistently contradicting his own statements, and the story he told was highly implausible. According to him, he and Carol had been very close, but they hadn't seen each other for several months, and she had stopped making contact. He couldn't explain why he had only contacted the police now. Under pressure, Fontana eventually began to testify, confessing that he had accidentally ended Carol's life. He claimed that in early January they were filming extreme content for a client who had paid a large sum. The script required David to bind the woman, tape her mouth shut, put a bag over her head, and then brutally beat, torture, and torment her using various tools, including a hammer. They had agreed that he would not hit her with full force, but she would act as if she were in severe pain. However, during the process, he supposedly went too far, misjudged a hammer blow, and fractured her skull. When he removed the bag from her head, he saw she was in death throes. But instead of calling for medical help or trying to assist her, he, out of mercy, decided to end her suffering with a final hammer blow. Then, the criminal, allegedly in a panic, dismembered the body but, unsure what to do next, simply stored the remains in his freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of them, reconstructing the actual events. The investigation revealed that the mysterious, perverse client was Davide himself, who had contacted the woman using a fake account. Evidently, he didn't want to let her go and devised a sophisticated plan of revenge because she had decided to leave him. Additionally, during the torture session, the man extracted the password to her phone, which supposedly was also part of the script and a client's whim. On January 11th, around 9 in the evening, Fontana ended the woman's life by fatally striking her with a hammer. The next day, he purchased a large freezer using the deceased's credit card, as well as a saw and an axe from a hardware store, which he used to dismember the body. He made every effort to disfigure the body to prevent identification. He removed the tattoos along with the skin, and what remained of them, he tried to burn, shred, and literally erase. After that, David placed the body parts in bags and stored them in the freezer, where they remained for over 2 months. During this time, the criminal communicated with the victim's relatives and friends on her behalf, and also managed her social media, creating the illusion that Carol was alive. By the end of March, the criminal apparently thought the danger had passed and decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff in a deserted area. He hoped that the remains would either never be found, or, by the time they would have decomposed to the point of being unidentifiable. However, Davide was mistaken, and the body was discovered just 2 days later, with authorities tracking him down within a week. Trial and verdict. The most bewildering and incomprehensible aspect of this case was that nearly 3 months after the girl's disappearance, none of her relatives or friends had reported her missing. They were all satisfied with the responses in messengers and posts on social media. Even the fiancé, who thought Carol was ill, was not alarmed by the fact that she didn't answer calls and never tried to visit her. If someone had raised the alarm, the murderer would have been tracked immediately via the signal from the victim's phone, which had been on and in David's possession all this time. At the trial, Fontana expressed remorse and swore that he loved Maltese and had taken her life unintentionally. He also claimed that he had planned to end his own life after her death, unable to cope with the grief. Naturally, such a statement sounded foolish, and nobody believed him, but the defense insisted that the incident was indeed an unintentional act of violence, despite the fact that the defendant himself had commissioned the recording of the brutal video. On June 12, 2023, the court found Fontana guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay compensation to the deceased's son in the amount of 200,000 euros, as well as 100,000 to Carol's mother and 50,000 euros to the father of her child. Surprisingly, the manner of assassinating was not deemed cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, so the criminal could potentially be eligible for parole.